Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we are looking at what could be the biggest risers in college football in the year 2025. These are going to be teams we think could make a drastic improvement to their records from last season. Could go from average to good, good to great, or great to elite. As always, be sure to like and subscribe and comment down below who else you think will make a big improvement in 2025. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting with Texas Tech. Who else could we really have started off this list with other than a team we've been sipping the Kool-Aid on the past few seasons? They haven't quite made the leap to a top team in their conference, but we think all that could change this year considering what they've done this offseason. They bring in the #1 transfer portal class according to On3 Sports, adding a ton of production and depth to their roster. On top of that, they return almost 70% of their roster from last season, including 82% of their production on defense, which is the highest percentage on defense in the country. And most importantly, in our opinion, they bring in Sheil Wood at defensive coordinator, who's averaged an amazing 4.9 yards allowed per play in his 3 seasons at defensive coordinator at Troy, Tulane, and Houston, which would have made for a top 25 defense in 2024 and would have been a massive improvement from the 6.4 yards allowed per play by their defense this past year, which landed them at 113th in the country. Not good, to say the least. If the Red Raiders can have an offensive output at least in the ballpark of what they did this year and can straighten up that defense, we think there's no reason they can't add 2 or 3 wins to their schedule in 2025, possibly compete for the Big 12 title and maybe even a playoff spot. Texas Tech is our first riser of the video. And next, we're going to jump to the SEC and talk about the Oklahoma Sooners. We've talked about them a couple times this offseason on our various social media pages. Be sure to follow us, by the way, at O&O Sports. And they've essentially hit the reset button. Brent Venables hired a new staff, brought in a big transfer portal and high school class, and brought in what we think could be the biggest impact transfer prospect in John Mateer of Washington State, in our opinion. A great offseason haul, but let's look a little bit deeper. Like we said, they bring in John Mateer, but they also bring in Ben Arbuckle from Washington State, who is best known for developing both Mateer and Cam Ward in his 2 seasons at Wazoo. His offenses average 5.9 yards per play, which would have been good for top 50 in the country this season, opposed to the 4.2 yards per play Oklahoma averaged this season, which was nearly the worst in college football last season, only ahead of new FBS team Kennesaw State, Florida State, and Kent State. But with those additions, their new quarterback, their restructured offensive line, which plagued that offense last year, and the 6th best returning production numbers in the country on offense, we think Oklahoma will be much improved on that side of the ball. And on defense, you really don't need to get that much better. You've been a top 50 defense on average so far in the Venables era, and you bring in Wes Goodwin as your next DC, who hovered around a top 30 defense in the past 3 seasons at Clemson. Nothing really to worry about on that side. It's mostly going to be about how much you can improve on offense. If they can catch up to the defense and be anywhere from a top 30 to a top 60 team offensively, they could add as many as 2 to 4 wins to their overall record next season. A drastic improvement, we know, but we truly believe that if the offense can just get it together. And for our next team, we're staying in the SEC to look at the Auburn Tigers. They were a bit of an enigma last season. Their numbers both offensively and defensively on the season pointed to what should have been at least 7 or 8 wins with their schedule, but they only ended up with 5, and we think this bodes well for them this year. They're top 5 in the SEC in returning production. They bring in a top 10 class in both the portal and in high school. They loaded up their quarterback room with a lot of talent and experience with guys like Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma, who we think will be Hugh Freeze's best fit in 2025, Ashton Daniels of Stanford, Tanner Bailey from South Carolina, and they add a high 4-star quarterback in Deuce Knight out of high school. They add highly sought after wide receiver Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech through the portal, who could make the leap to a 1,000+ yard and 10+ touchdown receiver in 2025. They've got all the talent in the world on offense, but in our opinion, how much Auburn improves next year will be reliant on the defense, which, like we said, was good in 2024, but only returns about 59% of their production from last season. Not terrible, but around the middle of the pack in terms of the rest of the league. They don't add a ton of talent out of the portal, apart from a guy like Rayon Strader from Miami of Ohio, who we think could start immediately. They do add depth on that side, which is always a good thing, but they lose a good chunk of rotational talent from that front seven to the NFL draft and the portal, so it will be a matter of finding the next guys and getting them implemented into their system, which all things considered shouldn't be that hard. Like we said, their record did not accurately reflect their talent level and how well they actually played last year. We think even if they do moderately regress on defense, they'd still be around a top 30 to top 40 team overall next season, and like we said, should more accurately reflect in their record next year. 5-7 in 2024. We'd be surprised if they didn't finish in 7, 8, maybe 9 win territory next season. And next we have the Michigan State Spartans out of the Big Ten. Jonathan Smith and his squad still have a lot of ground to make up this year. Went 5-7 last year. Didn't look great, but had to suffer through what ended up being one of the hardest stretches of any schedule this season in weeks 5 through 11. They faced Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois in that stretch. We don't foresee them having to endure a stretch like that this season unless 2 of Nebraska, Minnesota, and UCLA become 10 or 11 win teams this year. And on top of that, they're 1 year into the Jonathan Smith experiment. It took a while for him to get it going at Oregon State, but he's got a lot more talent to work with at Michigan State, including a top 25 portal class, the 30th ranked returning production class, and most importantly, another year of Aiden Childs, who struggled a bit in his sophomore season, but showed flashes of elite passing talent when given a clean pocket, something Smith also did an amazing job of addressing this offseason, bringing in 4 additional offensive linemen through the portal to reshape that offensive line, a majority of whom are projected starters for this upcoming season and who should at the very least make an impact as rotational pieces. They also revamped their wide receiver and running back rooms with a number of additions to help Childs as well. And as far as their defense goes, they are returning less on that side of the ball, but it was the less glaring issue on that team. They ranked in the mid 50s in terms of yards allowed per play. It'll just be a matter of plugging in guys they got in the portal and guys who have been in the system the past 2 years to fill those gaps, and they should be in a position to at least stay where they were last year and give it a boost in offensive output. With Charles receiving the proper protection, we could see 5 wins from last year easily turning into 7 this year, with 8 or 9 wins on the table if Charles can explode into the player a lot of people, myself included, think he can be. And last in our biggest risers, we're jumping to the ACC to look at the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and this one is pretty simple, folks. Good returning production numbers on both sides of the ball, didn't drastically improve in the portal, but filled gaps where they were needed in the secondary, both lines, and at receiver. Made a great hire on paper at defensive coordinator and poaching Texas's longtime safeties coach Blake Gideon, and they retained their entire offense from last year in the Haynes brothers, Jamal Haynes and Haynes King. Those 2 players alone were responsible for almost 70% of the Georgia Tech offense last year, and it's hard for me to believe they won't get better on offense next year with the additions they've made to the offensive line, namely 5-star guard Josh Petty, one of the best prospects in the country, in the running back room, and Malachi Hosley, and at wide receiver with FIU's entire receiving room and Eric Rivers and Dean Patterson, who combined for almost 2,000 receiving yards and 19 touchdowns last year to pair alongside Tech's second best wide receiver from last season in Malik Rutherford. And with all that, the sky is the limit for that offense. They ranked in the mid 20s in terms of yards per play in 2024 and could honestly jump into the top 20 or even higher next year. But as for the defense, like we said, they make a great move on paper hiring Blake Gideon, but he's never been a coordinator before, so has the potential to backfire on them in a major way. But I personally don't see that happening. Last year, they ranked around 100th in yards allowed per play, and with that hire, the added depth and starting caliber production, and the amount of production they have returning from last year on that side of the ball, I see them at least making a moderate improvement to around the 60-70 range in terms of yards allowed per play, which with the favorable schedule they naturally will have in the ACC, could propel them from 7 wins this past season to around 9 or 10 potentially in 2025. And with that, thank you for watching. Those are our biggest potential risers for 2025. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you really enjoyed it, feel free to share it with some of your friends, your aunt, your uncle, your dad down in Oxford, Mississippi. Maybe not him, but it is always appreciated, and we will see you in the next one.